We seem to be live on Facebook. Um, it's Sunday, September the 22nd. My name is Allan. This is the online Gurdjieff group. And I was just a minute ago trying to explain the word flustered to Angelica, who is Brazilian and speaks Portuguese. And it's not one of those words you would necessarily find in a dictionary. But I was just trying to do too many things at once at the last minute. I was going to continue an answer to a question that Ian posed a number of weeks ago now, and I realized just like a quarter past, something popped in my mind, and it's like, I've got to get this quote so I can read this quote and explain a little bit more about it. So I had another quote already set up, but then I had to set up another quote, and so flustered. Frustrated, slightly, it comes from the word, it's connected to the word frustrated, as your dictionary told you, but it's more, it's not so much anger. Frustration is anger. Flustered is just like feeling a little overwhelmed, like you're thrown into the deep end. I mean, there's a degree of frustration involved in it, but it's just like, how am I going to get this all done on time? Just the interesting dimension of human language. So, and Angelica, we'll start with you. How are things in Sao Paulo, Brazil? Brazil, as
Brazil.
Brazil.
It's okay. And I decided to practice the morning sitting every day for 1 month. Okay, and I started 4 days ago, early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and so it's interesting to observe what happened with me after the exercise, and I'm trying to find the correct moment where I cross the boundary of tranquil and start to move the waves, and I will.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the morning sitting is a very interesting exercise. I call it the morning sitting because I'm trying to encourage people to do that exercise first thing in the morning. But it comes via George Adi, who was one of Mr. Gurdjieff's students who moved to Australia. And I came across a recorded version, not the version that I put out, but a very similar version, just recorded spontaneously with him. And understanding everything that I know about the Gurdjieff teachings, the whole purpose of the morning sitting is to breathe in higher elements of the octave of air, to breathe in some of the higher elements that we need for the lower transmutation of our emotions. So if we, as Mr. Gurdjieff said in Search of the Miraculous, if we don't have the proper molecules within inside us at the higher level, we cannot do the proper inner work because we need the higher to blend with the lower. And one of the analogies he said was that we need a tiny, tiny trace of gold to make gold. So this exercise, someone wrote on the YouTube page, oh, this is just Vipassana. And I said, it's not Vipassana. You don't understand that we're extracting molecules from the air, really high refined molecules through this exercise that will help us to continue with our inner work. Angelica, have you noticed an effect of doing this on your day? Does it become easier or harder to self-remember, to become aware of yourself, to do inner work? Theoretically, it should be easier. But everyone is different. So for some people, for some reason, it could make things harder because they could be pushing themselves perhaps beyond the limit of where they should be. But does it makes things easier for you throughout the day then?
Yes, for me, makes easier, and I feel when I started to painting or cooking or whatever, things
Flows?
flows
Yeah.
easier and better, and I feel my body as a battery,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this gives me power to work. And even when I go to street and do something
Yeah.
out of my home, I feel one distance when I meet people or in the office, and I try to maintain the harmony I felt in the morning early.
Yeah. It really should also have a pronounced effect on our emotions, on
Mm,
what we're feeling. So it's designed to help us move the octave of air up by breathing in those higher particles that we need for the transformational process. But now let's move down to Ian drinking his coffee. That's probably also why I'm flustered this morning after last week where I had to go to the toilet so badly. Right at the end, I haven't allowed myself to have coffee until about 15 minutes ago. And so maybe I'm in a bit of a brain fog. But how are you doing, Ian? How was your inner work going?
Doing well. The inner work is proceeding. One thing I noticed yesterday, I was talking with my partner, and she has a she's a Libran, and she very much uh, believes she has those traits. So she's always going around and oh, do I want this thing? Do I want this thing? How does it work? Reading all the ingredients, and for whatever reason, that irritates me quite a bit. Probably, I mean, it's my own stuff, but it irritates me quite a bit. I managed to catch myself yesterday, and rather than get irritated with her, sort of notice what it was in me that was like where that was coming from. I was trying to, turn that backwards. And I don't think I was very good at it, but I noticed that the irritation was, how do I put this? It was all of it was me trying to avoid something,
Okay.
like some kind of feeling or some kind of emotional thing going on inside of me. Like I was uncomfortable, and I was trying to avoid that discomfort by getting angry at her or rushing her along, running through my head. Oh, I just gotta wait. Oh, it takes so long. Blah 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 blah. All of that was. I noticed it was to avoid some unpleasant feelings, and so I tried to feel those instead. And I don't quite have a handle on what they were, but the moment of switching it, of using this interaction with her as a chance to notice something in myself, I think that's due to what we've been doing here and being able to my body and being able to, be present to that as opposed to just automatically going along with,
Were you able to give it another name, naming these things besides irritation? I mean, names are not emotions. I try to make that very clear with all my clients. They're labels we can attach to emotions. And we can attach a number of different labels to each emotion, depending on what we want to reflect in that emotion. And so you were irritable, irritation, frustrated. Was there exasperation? I mean, is this a regular routine of hers to go into that?
Yeah, I would say especially around the grocery store.
Okay.
It's pretty regular.
Yeah. You couldn't have thought that she was actually using the head brain to discern, do I is this one better than this one? Or
I can think that.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that all I want to, and I'm still, you know, the emotions come up. But I think the closest I got to naming it or seeing it differently was there was a flavor of this is the part I'm having a really hard time putting a finger on, but under the irritation, there was some kind of a sadness and sort of a feeling of like being invisible or not mattering, something like that.
Okay. How was it related to your ego? Was it, you know, they weren't, you know, being I'm too invisible, they're not focusing on me, or
yeah, I mean, that's, I think, like I said, I just got a little taste of it, so I didn't get enough to really fully digest, but there was sort of a like, well, what about me? I'm bored. I just want to get out of here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get space to do this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And yet so much of it, like, I know why she's looking at the ingredients because she has special dietary needs, and I want her to eat well. She feels better when she does, and she was having a fun time in the grocery store, and I don't want to like stomp all over her enjoyment. And like all these, you know, these thoughts are in my head, but they're having no effect on
the feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you know, this is completely tangential to Fritz Peters actually wrote two books that have been combined into one that's now called Journey with the Mystic, or My Journey with the Mystic. But it started out as My Boyhood with Gurdjieff, which he wrote. And then a few years later, I don't even know what the name of the second book is, because the copy I have just adds them both. And as I said, this is tangential. But Mr. Gurdjieff said that there is truth in astrology. And once upon a time, going way back, it was an ancient science. And within astrology, what we're really supposed to do is we're supposed to identify those particular traits within us that conform to our sign, and then to systematically break them. So I am a fellow Libran with your partner. And for so much of my life, it was all about balance. And now I will throw things out of balance just to throw things out of balance. And I don't like it because it goes against my natural tendency. But rather than trying to make peace, sometimes I'll try to make war, and I'll get, you know, and I'll act opposite to it. And, you know, he said that we should find the chief fault. It didn't quite say this. I should do a whole meeting on this particular excerpt. Sort of that chief fault, that chief characteristic that we have, and it's somehow related to our astrological sign. And rather than becoming more of our astrological sign, we should be developing the opposite. So anyone who's a Libra and is interested in peace and harmony and tranquility, we should be going out of our way to create a bit of discord. And I do this and I don't like it, but there's something liberating about it. And I know what it's like to go around and measure everything. It's, you know, it was a big part of my life. And I can understand how frustrated you might get if they do it all the time. And if it's sort of a regular chronic habit of theirs. Is it a chronic habit of hers?
I probably think it's more chronic than it is, because it does rub up against something quite strongly, but yeah, it's pretty regular.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, the ability to withstand the displeasing manifestations of another person towards ourselves is the highest one. But just being able to withstand the displeasing manifestations of another, not even directed to us, that wasn't directed to you. That was just her doing something that you have found very frustrating, probably because you've been in the relationship, what is it, 5, 6, 7 years now?
About 5.5.
5.5?
Yeah, 6 in November.
Yeah, so it's a significant portion of time, enough time to get really upset at those little things in relationships that happen over and over and over again. But again, this is your reaction to it. It's not what she's doing. She's not doing anything except being herself. And it's wonderful that you're having the opportunity to notice and to observe and to pay attention to your own reaction. Doing that over and over again is, the photographs that Mr. Gurdjieff talks about, so to speak, to take these photographs of ourselves in certain situations where we normally don't see ourselves. And in this context, you had the chance to take that photograph of yourself, to observe the inner manifestation, to try and figure it out. And as a feeling state, it's connected to other feeling states. And the more you become aware of it, the more you begin to gain control over it. So that's the first step, is to see it, and then to see it again, and then to see it again, and then to see it again. And eventually you get a little bit ahead of it and you can start controlling it. But you could also ask, is this an appropriate emotion? Is what I'm feeling appropriate for this situation? And if it isn't, then what is going on within me? This is then a being impulse, something arising from within me that, is related to me rather than what they did. But that's interesting. Thank you. Karen, one more thing. Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
Real quick, to kind of emphasize an aspect of it, I noticed that the feeling underneath the irritation was something I had to actually force myself to slow down enough to actually feel it. And that felt like, in my head, or something, I was labeling it as intentional suffering, because it felt like it was something unpleasant in my system that I normally gloss over, and I had to actually intentionally turn towards and kind of try and look at it. So that was one of the things.
Okay. We could talk about this for quite a while.
Yeah.
So there was a degree of intentional suffering. Was there any connection or relationship to remorse of conscience?
No, not in the organic shame aspect of it, like the actual physical response. That didn't come up yet. I'm sure it will if I get deep enough.
Okay, was there any kind of remorse of conscience that, geez, look at all the work I've done and I'm still irritable, and why am I doing this to myself? And were there any of those pseudo-recriminations kind of floating around in your head, or?
Not the look at all the work I've done, because I've gotten away from doing that. I actually tried to just say, yeah, I'm not where I'm at. I can't expect whatever I've done in the past to be, if I'm focusing on the fact that I shouldn't be feeling this, I'm ignoring the fact that I am feeling this.
Yeah.
But there was a little bit of like I said, oh, she's having a good time. This is important to her. Why am I being such an ass? There was, that was what got me off the track in the first place.
Yeah, no, a lot of food for thought there. Karen, how are things going in Mexico? The cat seems to be around you, and
no, this is a dog.
Oh, that's a dog. Oh, okay. There was a cat there earlier.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of animals in this house.
Okay.
But I'm in a different location than usual, so I can have my pets climbing on me.
Climbing all over you.
Yeah. Speaking of remorse of conscience, I had an incident last week where I was just so hurtful in my mind, or mean-spirited toward a friend of my husband. Not personally, I didn't see him or anything, but I just was mean-spirited, and it really hurt me and it hurt him, and it just brought me down to a level of realizing how I still have a lot of unpleasant thoughts toward other people.
He was especially. Was he present? He wasn't present, or
no, he wasn't. He wasn't. It's just old. He's represents an old side of I don't know, something. I can't really explain it, but I just felt really bad that I had had such bad thoughts about him and kind of not nice to my husband about his kindness. Richard was super kind to this guy who's had a stroke and needed help and everything. And I was resentful, and I just can't understand how I could be so petty.
Yeah.
It's very, very insightful in a bad way.
I mean, underneath the pettiness is your ego. What is, I mean, it's something about your ego that at the core of this. How is it rubbing against your ego? Rubbing against you? Is it just?
I don't know. I really don't know, Allan. I've thought a lot about it.
Okay.
The guy is pathetic. It was totally kind and just of Richard to take care of him for a spell. And I was just resentful of it, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
But it's gave me a comeuppance. In a good way, though. I mean, in a learning way.
Yeah. Okay, that's something else we could talk about, extensively. These feelings, these frustrations. It's wonderful that, you're observing them and that you're talking about them, so that hopefully this connects with other people who may be watching this a year or 2 years from now, realizing that, these things are part of the human condition. And the first step is the step of observing them. And then once we've observed them enough to try to identify them, to figure out what they are, and then to try to figure out what caused them, the energies, the whatever that lay behind them. So this is good. I'm just going to, hopefully I'll be able to, I don't have any videos today. I'm just, whoops. Just the conception, the fact, the reason that we do this work. I work for myself. I work for my fellow human being, or I work for mankind, and I work for the earth herself. Or in Mr. Gurdjieff's words, I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. And it's always good to begin inner work by stating such vows. So let's just do a generalized awareness of our body. Let's first become aware of gravity and the effect of gravity on our body. Become aware of that downward pull. Become aware of our sitting bones on the seat beneath us. Perhaps our thighs underneath the seat, our feet on the ground. Become aware of the effect of gravity on our body pulling us down. And then become aware of the sense of balance. How your head is balanced on your neck, which is balanced on your shoulders, which is balanced on your rib cage, your shoulder blades, your spine, your pelvic bones. And then become aware of the atmospheric pressure of the air that surrounds you. And we can sense this at the point of our skin. We can become aware, we can recall what it was like perhaps to be in the bottom of a swimming pool with the atmospheric pressure of the water around ourselves. And then we can become aware of the atmospheric pressure of the air around ourselves right here and now. And then we can also become aware of the temperature of our environment. And then we can begin to move inside and become aware of our own temperature, how our temperature is different than the ambient temperature of the environment around us. Then we can become aware of various inner sensations. the inside of our mouth, the inside of our throat, the inside of our esophagus, the inside of our stomach. We can also become aware of our bladder, our colon. We also have special receptors that are devoted to the awareness of the expansion and contraction of our lungs and our rib cage. Try to become aware of the various joints, like we have joints in our fingers, like we have joints in our legs and arms. We also have joints in our ribs. So as we expand and breathe in, the joints in our ribs move, and as we breathe out, they also move. And then just try to develop an internalized sense inside your body. Perhaps become aware of the flesh inside your body. So the flesh in your head, in your neck, in your upper torso, middle torso, lower torso, the flesh in your buttocks, your upper legs, knees, feet. And then let's begin and do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. So as a vessel fills with warm golden honey, begin to fill with sensation in the bottom of your feet, and then filling up your whole feet with sensation. Then filling with sensation up to your ankles, up through your lower legs to your knees, up through your upper legs to your hips and hands, up through the middle of your torso to your elbows, solar plexus, middle of back, up through your upper torso, so your upper back, your chest, your upper arms, all the way to your shoulders, then up through the bottom of your neck to the top of your neck, and then from the bottom of your skull all the way up to the top of your skull, the top of your head, and try to sense your body as one organic whole. Try to sense your body as one organic whole. I'm just going to bring something up to the screen. This is awakeningbell.org. It's gone through a number of changes, names. It was set up by a group of Buddhists in Washington, D.C., and it has been run now for quite a few years. So they have a mindfulness bell. If you can see at the beginning of that where my cursor is, I could like the small bell to ring every 15 minutes. I would like the big bell to ring every 30 minutes. And you can, of course, change these. And let me just stop sharing, make sure I can share the sound. Okay. So the mindfulness bell. When you hear the mindfulness bell, the most important thing to do is to come back to this sensation of self, this awareness of ourself, the sensation of ourself from the bottom of our feet all the way to the top of our head. Now you can just open this tab, awakeningbell.org, leave it open with your Windows, with your browser, and you can set it to ring in the background. And you can have a big bell or a little bell. My preference is I turn the big bell off. I like the little bell. And so every time you hear the little bell and it rings for 32 seconds, just bring yourself back to your body as fully as you can. So the sensation of clothing that touches your skin, the air that touches your skin, the inside of your body, sensing your body, aware of your body, trying to build up this internal sensation of your body, this awareness of your physical body is the most basic and preliminary of all of the exercises. Everything else is predicated on this. And I keep on coming back to it over and over again. But you can set up a mindfulness bell on your computer that will remind you however long you want it. Right now it's set for 15 minutes. I can move it way up. I don't know if you've seen this, so I could set it for an hour, or I could set it for 5 minutes. And actually with my live group, what I do is I have my computer in the background, my laptop, and I turn this on for about 6 or 7 minutes and encourage everyone when they hear it ringing, without me or anyone really necessarily stopping what they're saying, just to bring their awareness back to this moment. So as I ring this bell, and it's going to last about 32 seconds, really strive to be present in your body as fully as you can, developing what Mr. Gurdjieff called the sensation of self, what we can also call the organic awareness of the body, or the awareness of the body as one organic whole. This awareness of our physical self all at once, all at the same time. This is the most important basic awareness we can have, the awareness of inhabiting our physical body. So for the next 32 seconds, really just strive to be aware of your physical body. And then, you know, as an aside, we can also, see if I can quickly find it, the Mindfulness Bell. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's a free app on Android. Whoops. On, I have to angle it slightly, on Android, on iPhones. And for this, you can set it to ring between 11 a.m., for instance, and 9 p.m., or 9 a.m. and 11 p.m., so it doesn't ring at night. You can set the Mindfulness Bell as the app that you can get on your phone to ring throughout the day, randomly or at specific times. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about reminding factors. And so when we're on the computer, which is a very mechanical activity, if we open up a tab for the Mindfulness Bell and allow it to ring every 15 minutes in the background, that will at least be 4 times an hour. We come back to the sensation of self. So come back to the sensation of self. Become aware of your organic self, your body as one organic whole, the sensation of self. And then let's do the collected state exercise. Let's imagine, and it's not imagination, as the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we surrounded by an atmosphere. We can call it our aura, our etheric field, our energetic field, or whatever. I do like the term atmosphere because it equates us with larger planetary objects like the Earth, which has an atmosphere. And this is all part of the understanding of cosmology. So become aware of your own atmosphere. Draw it back around you. Collect it. Collect it, bring it back to about a meter, meter and a half around you, 4 to 6 feet. Try to become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Keep it calm. Keep it still. Keep it tranquil. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 up to 3. And when I get to 3, just breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine that something remains to settle within yourself. So 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in. And then as you breathe out, imagine something remains within you that settles within you, that can help to form a higher being body. Something we'll talk about in a minute. And let's just finish by silently repeating in your mind, may results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And, you know, as I always try to encourage people, try to maintain this sensation of self as long as you can, particularly throughout this meeting, throughout your day, wherever you are. Try to bring yourself back to your body. Try to develop this awareness of your body. Try to do it so you can become aware of your body like that. And wherever you are, you can practice this. And as you practice this, you are seeding yourself with those emanations, with those things, whatever they are that can crystallize within you. Now, this topic doesn't seem to end, but the misuse of C12, the misuse of sexual energy. I've gone over this in quite great detail, but there's something that I want to bring out, something that I want to emphasize a little bit more. And so I'm going to share the screen. And whoops, wrong one. And this is about the misuse of sexual energy. This comes from In Search of the Miraculous. It's Mr. Gurdjieff. I think I've read this quote, or aspects of this quote, or larger, you know, parts of where this quote was a small part of a number of times. So this is about the misuse of sexual energy. But this is only one aspect of it. Another aspect consists in the fact that when the energy of the sex center is plundered by the other centers and spent on useless work, it has nothing left for itself and has to steal the energy of other centers, which is much lower and coarser than its own. And yet the sex center is very important for the general activity, and particularly the inner growth of the organism. Because working with hydrogen-12, it can receive a very fine food of impressions, such as none of the ordinary centers can receive. The fine food of impressions is very important for the manufacture of higher hydrogens. But when the sex center works with energy that is not its own, that is, with the comparatively low hydrogens, 48 and 24, its impressions become much coarser, and it ceases to play the role in the organism which it could play. At the same time, union with and the use of its energy by the thinking center creates far too great an imagination on the subject of sex. Actually, this last bit I've talked about in great detail before. But when the sex center works with energy that's not its own, that is, with the comparatively low hydrogens, 48 and 24, its impressions become much coarser and cease to play a role in the organism which it could play. And so I've been thinking about this passage. I've been thinking about this passage in the context of some of my clients. When the sex center is robbed of the higher hydrogens that it needs to operate properly, it's forced to operate at a comparatively lower level using coarser hydrogens. I had a client, probably about 4 months ago, who came to see me, and one of his complaints was a pornography addiction on the internet. And this man spent well over 6 hours each day looking at porn. The linking of the head brain with the images, with everything. And I mean, he was obviously masturbating to porn, but you can't keep that up for 6 hours. That there is some kind of degenerate process that was going on within him. And the ejaculation, which Mr. Gurdjieff says can be a very cleansing procedure. But, you know, he was ejaculating and ejaculating and ejaculating, and he just got into very much like a zombified state where he was just trapped in his demons, trapped with the images online. I apologize, it's saying my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully it isn't. So if I freeze or whatever, hopefully on my end it doesn't slow it down, and it just records fine. But so he was plundering C12. He was probably using C12 quicker than he could produce it. I had another client, and his addiction was methamphetamine. But he wasn't really addicted to methamphetamine. Somehow 2 wires got crossed in him, and whenever he would go on a binge for meth or methamphetamine, it would invariably include crawling in some of the worst places in town, having unprotected sex over and over and over again for up to 36 hours. And there is no way the sex center was actually operating with the really refined energy it should normally be operating with. And so when the energy of the sex center is plundered, and Mr. Gurdjieff, he talked about titillation, he talked about masturbation. A lot of our problems were the result of childhood masturbation, he would tell people, and all sorts of things. And I came across one quote of his. I don't know where it is. When I come across it again, I will mark it, where he said it was impossible to self-remember and masturbate at the same time. That somehow there was this real degenerative, energetic pulling down process. And so when the sex center is forced to use coarser, less refined hydrogens, it can lead to all sorts of problems. I had another client, this one's going back many years, who he was actually the first one who told me the intricacies of sadomasochism and bondage, and he was homosexual, and he said he liked to be in the non-dominant position. And again, this is a coarsening. It's not utilizing the energy correctly. Again, I came across this in the Gurdjieff literature. I don't remember exactly where it was. It was one of the secondary comments. But the author or the speaker said, recall your first sexual experience, assuming it wasn't violent or it wasn't done, in a house of prostitution or anything like that. If it was a genuinely loving, open, gentle sexual experience, as a teenager or whatever. He said, or the writer, I believe it was a he, that, there was a certain intensity. There was a certain innocence. There was a certain awakening that was associated with that experience. And, after having had sex 100, 1,000, even more times, something of that initial experience is lost. Something is coarsened. And especially in our sex-obsessed society with, Grindr and Tinder and plenty of fish and all these things for hooking up and hooking up culture, they're not spending the proper time to experience those higher molecules, the higher C12. It's a real coarsening of the whole process. There's more to this. When I said that I was flustered, it was this quote that I'm going to pull up now that is like, yes, where is this quote? And then I have to, modify it and get it so that it's, I'm going to do a bunch of reformatting. So if there are a few mistakes, it's because I didn't go through it properly. Again, this is from In Search of the Miraculous. You should understand that in this case, as well as in all others, the general law cannot be changed. But one can change one's own position in relation to this law. One can escape from the general law. The more so since in this law about which I speak, that is, in the power of sex over people, are included many different possibilities. And I just want to highlight that quote, the power of sex over many people. It's almost like some power takes over people and they become obsessed with sexuality and sexual games and partners and all sorts of things. So the power of sex over people. It includes the chief form of slavery, and it is also the chief possibility of liberation. So here he's saying that our sexuality and the misuse of C12 is our chief form of slavery. And if we understand this process, we can use it as our chief form of liberation. This is what you must understand. New birth, of which we have spoken before, depends as much upon sexual energy as do physical birth and the propagation of our species. So on the mystical path, we must die before we can be reborn, and it's necessary to die on the mystical path for the new birth. And he's saying that the new birth, highly implicated in the new birth, is the proper use, and not just the proper use, but a certain accumulation of C12 within us is required. Hydrogen 12, C12, is the hydrogen which represents the final product of the transformation of food in the human organism. In other words, the octave of food. This is the penultimate aspect of the octave of food. The whole octave of food is pointing towards the transformation of C12, or the creation of C12 within us. This is the matter with which sex works and with which sex manufactures. It is seed or fruit. Hydrogen C12 can pass into dough of the next octave with the help of an additional shock. So this is saying that C12 can pass into DO6, which is a very high and refined molecule, extremely high. That's actually at the level of the Godhead, with the help of the additional shock. DO6 would be the holy reconciling element. Hydrogen 6, extremely refined. But this shock can be of a dual nature, and different octaves can begin, one outside the organism which has produced C, and the other in the organism itself. The union of male and female C12 and all that accompanies it constitutes the shock of the first kind, and the new octave begun with its help develops independently as a new organism or a new life. So here he's saying that when the C12 of a man comes together with the C12 of a woman through sexual intercourse, that a new life, a child, that conception is possible. And this is one of the legitimate uses of C12, is in the conception of human life and human beings. This is the normal and natural way to use the energy of C12. But in the same organism, there is a further possibility. And this is the possibility of creating a new life within the actual organism. And here he's actually speaking about the Kesdjan body, creating a new life, a new body, a new organism within ourselves. And this is the possibility of creating a new life within the actual organism, in which the C12 has been manufactured without the union of the two principles, the male and the female. A new octave then develops within the organism, not outside it. This is the birth of the astral body, or as he preferred to call it later, the Kesdjan body. You must understand that the astral body is born of the same material, of the same matter as the physical body, only the process is different. The whole of the physical body, all of its cells are, so to speak, permeated by emanations of the matter C12. So even now as I speak, to all of those of you who are listening, every cell in your body contains C12. But these cells have not reached a sufficient saturation. And so reading again from the quote, and when they have become sufficiently saturated, the matter C12 begins to crystallize. The crystallization of this matter consists in the formation of the astral body. The transition of matter C12 into emanations and the gradual saturation of the whole organism by it is what alchemy calls transmutation or transformation. It is just this transformation of the physical body into the astral that alchemy called the transformation of the coarse into the fine, or the transformation of base metals into gold. Completed transmutation, that is to say, the formation of the astral body, is only possible in a healthy, normally functioning organism. In a sick or a perverted or a crippled organism, no transmutation is possible. So that client of mine who take meth and go on sexual benders, there's no transmutation possible. That other client of mine who had a pornography addiction and would spend 6 hours a day watching pornography, no transmutation is possible. First, we have to clean up the functioning of our body, and to clean up the functioning and the use of this energy. And when we've done that, then the energy, we've got to sort of increase the output of the energy in our cells and supersaturate our cells until at a certain point crystallization occurs. And he's mentioned this before in Search of the Miraculous, like a retort stand with a flame, and at a certain point, things change. So this is the goal. And within alternate traditions, particularly the monastic tradition, they only work with C12. They don't understand that there's a chain reaction, that the reaction should actually start with So12 of the octave of the octave of air of feelings. And this is why the morning sitting and those exercises that help us breathe in the higher elements necessary for the continuation of that octave is so important. So we work with So12. So12 has an effect on, let me just see if I can bring this up. I know I have to have this somewhere quickly. And I can never find this stuff when I want it. Here it is. I'm just going to share the screen. So the three-story factory. The energy that we're talking about right now is C12. And I don't know why this is in blue. Can I change it? Yeah. So C12. We can waste this energy. Like someone running on empty, the client who would masturbate 6 hours every day, or the person who would take methamphetamines and go on a drug sex-fueled adventure, not adventure, he didn't really like it, just made him feel really bad about himself. Or, the people who are obsessed with sexuality, obsessed, wanting to get it on all the time. They lead all conversations back to it. They're always flirting, whatever. They're misusing C12. So it's not allowed to develop higher. But the proper way, C12 has to saturate our system. But the proper way is working on So12 of the octave of air. And the way we begin to develop this is through these breathing exercises, through this working with feeling and trying to develop this awareness of feeling as different than sensation. And then this has I'm trying to draw an arrow there, an effect on Me12. And when he talks about impressions are actually related to the octave of impressions. So they're more related to Me12. So he was collapsing a few things in that brief description. And then through this whole process, it then triggers C12. And so there's a chain reaction that's supposed to occur at the higher level that leads to the supersaturation of C12 in our cells, which eventually leads to a crystallization of C12 within ourselves. So I'm going to stop sharing this. So by rubbing the sexual center of the proper energy, it coarsens sexuality, it coarsens the sexual act. Rather than being something pure and life-affirming and vibrant, it becomes coarse, it becomes dull, it becomes a notch on the bedpost. And there's so many different ways that this energy is misused. But if two sexual partners in the process of having sex really focused on the deep level of physical intimacy, if they focused on touching, if they focused on sensation, if they focused on developing the whole sexual act as a process of self-remembering, really trying to use it to awaken rather than to coarsen it, like they do with sex clubs and binging and, the different ways of misusing it. That is one thing. It can be used to heighten the impressions that come from the sensation of the body. It can be used as an almost mystical experience. But when the energy of the sex center is plundered by the other centers, it doesn't have this capability. This is not sort of in the cards, this ability to then take this energy, crystallize it, and transmute it into something higher and more refined and create a different body within ourselves. So I don't know if that's that's got to be a little bit better of a shading of an answer, Ian. Any questions on that right at the moment that you can think of? Or any of you, any questions?
At the moment, there's a lot to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that was, the coarsening, because that was the one thing you quoted in, the question that you asked me, if it doesn't have the proper energy, how does it work? What are the manifestations when the sex center doesn't work with the higher vibrations that it should? And here again, just a mental experiment. Imagine, having sex and it being this beautiful, magical, intense, awaken experience, trying to self-remember, trying to self-sense. And then imagine, being at a sex club and trying to get notches on a bedpost, or just it being the center of gravity of your life and you're always hitting on people and always aimed at that. Think of how one is much more refined and the other coarser. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to move to something else that I wanted to touch upon as well. Let me just go back. Now, this is something, this is going back to William Peter, I believe was the name that he used, the question on, well, instead of misusing sex, let's focus on the opposite side of the coin. Let's start to, what is the proper work, the proper use of the intellectual center? What is the proper use and function of the emotional or feeling center? And then he also asked about C influences. That, rather than get stuck in the misuse of C12, there are different ways that we can get unstuck. And, among them is just to stop engaging in the behavior that misuses the C12. The other is to begin to look at the right work of the other centers. That is what they should be doing before they were plundering C12 and using the sexual energy to grow in abnormal ways. And the other thing that he also thought about was the whole idea of C influences. So instead of putting ourselves under coarsening influences, to try to find environments or ways of putting ourselves under C influences. And there was something in this quote that I hadn't really pulled out and talked about. So I'm just going to go through the quote and explain this quote. Again, it comes from In Search of the Miraculous. It's the, I believe it's the beginning of chapter 10, where he's talking about C influences. This is a couple of paragraphs in from the chapter. It is necessary to understand And the whole thing depends on this understanding. We have spoken about the beginning of the way. The beginning of the way depends precisely upon this understanding, or upon the capacity for discriminating between the two kinds of influences. Of course, their distribution is unequal. One man receives more of the influences whose sources lies outside life, another less. A third is almost isolated from them. So Mr. Gurdjieff's talking about C or conscious influences. Those are not, it's not outside of life, but it's really above life, that come from higher than the realm of life. One man receives more of the influences whose sources lie outside life, another less. A third is almost isolated from them. But this cannot be helped. This is already fate. Speaking in general and taking normal life under normal conditions and a normal man, conditions are more or less the same for everybody. That is, to put it more correctly, difficulties are equal for everybody. Here, this is an aside, but this is really, really important for us to understand. You know, taking normal life under normal conditions and a normal man, we don't live in a world of normal life. We do not live in a world with normal conditions, and very, 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 very few of the people you pass on the street outside can, in any sense of the word, be called a normal man. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about the obital, that, you know, they're higher than the intellect or the intellectual or the artist. They're the common salt of the earth people. Those are the normal people. Most people that we know, that we communicate with, that we connect with, are not normal. So when people are reading this and In Search of the Miraculous and their normal conditions of life, a normal man, they're automatically assuming that it's talking about them, when the chances are it is not. There are very few normal people in our society. As a result of education, as a result of the internet, as a result of all sorts of influences, we are not starting from that position of normality. And so a lot of cleaning has to be done to the machine, so to speak. So the difficulty lies in separating the two kinds of influences. If a man in receiving them does not separate them, this is the difference between, you know, a normal influence and a conscious influence. And the conscious influence can come from conscious beings. I believe Mr. Gurdjieff was a conscious being. So I believe reading these words, they're actually a B influence, but they started out as a C influence because of his presence, or reading about the Buddha or the life of a conscious individual, or reading their words. That's, you know, when we're talking about outside of life, we're talking about these awakened masters, the influences that they can have on us. Now they can have, you know, they could, their influence could be like Mr. Gurdjieff. He died in 1949, so it's done through words and books. And so there's a lot of chance for turmoil and, you know, variations of interpretations to enter. And so the C influence becomes a B influence that mixes with the regular influences of life. So if a man receiving them does not separate them, that is, does not see or does not feel their difference, their action upon him is not separated. That is, they act in the same way, on the same level, and produce the same results. So you could have two people, let's say In Search of the Miraculous, certain quotes are there are C influences. You can have two people read them, and one receive them as C influences, and the other not receive them. And we can talk about the world's holy scriptures as being C influences. But But if a man in receiving these influences begins to discriminate between them and put on one side those which are not created in life itself, then gradually discrimination becomes easier, and after a certain time, a man can no longer confuse them with the ordinary influences of life. An important word for pretty well every mystical tradition is the word discrimination. And not as in racial discrimination, but the ability to discriminate between two different feelings, experiences, whatever. This ability to detect the difference, this ability to discriminate, to be discerning is another word that can be used. So he says, in receiving these influences, a man in receiving these influences begins to discriminate between them and put on one side those which are not created in life, and then put the others on the other side. This doesn't really happen in the way he's talking about. Because when we first encounter C influences, we're not even aware that they're C influences. But some of us can perceive that there's a different energy, a different flavor, a different taste to them. And we begin to crave them. We begin to want to experience more of them. We begin to discern between these C influences that come from a conscious individual or a conscious school, and the B influences, which is when they've mixed with life, and the A influences that are just the normal influences in life. For some of us, where something happens within us that we have this ability to discriminate, to discern the difference, and this is the development of a magnetic center. It's not like a man, the way he said it here, a man in receiving this influences begins to discriminate between them. It doesn't quite start out that way when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and you're just stepping onto the path. You're not really certain. You can be misled, you can be deceived, you can be mistaken. But there is nevertheless something in us that begins to awaken and begins to perceive the difference between these influences. The results of these influences, whose source lies outside life, collect together within him. He remembers them together, feels them together. They begin to form within him a certain whole. If I prepared more, I'm just wondering if I can quickly put my finger on crystallizations, which I talked about before, because this leads back into the whole. No, I can't do it. Sorry. Well, I'm still sharing. I'm sorry. And that share. Actually, bring it back. This one. Just a second. It's hard for me to see what goes on in my screen. So, for those of us who have a magnetic center, and those of us here right now, chances are all close to 100%, we have a magnetic center. It's what differentiates us. It's what distinguishes us from our fellow human being. Most people out there are just not interested in C influences. They're not interested in accumulating these influences. They're not interested in separating these influences from the normal influences in life. And those of us on the path, those of us who have a magnetic center, I would also say that there was very, very little that we ourselves did to develop the magnetic center, at least at the conscious level. We suddenly find something growing within ourselves. We suddenly find ourselves attracted to the mystical side of life. And back there in the quote, he said these things begin to form together within ourselves. The results, the results of these influences whose source lies outside of life collect together within him. He remembers them together, feels them together. They begin to form within him a certain whole. And here he's talking about the crystallization process. He uses the word crystallization a lot more in Tales, Beelzebub Tales to his grandson, than he does in Search of the Miraculous, even though it's an important term in Search of the Miraculous. So these influences begin to collect together within him. That is, they begin to crystallize. They begin to create something that physically exists within him. And if you go back to the talk I gave about, impressions and how impressions crystallize within us, this is a very high order crystallization. And I was once told this crystallization actually occurs in the higher part of the emotional center. So the higher emotional center is where these conscious influences crystallize together and take form and substance. And then they become like a lodestone that then further draws us to mystical teachings, to mystical experiences, to conscious influences. So let me just finish with this quote. The results of the influences whose source lies outside of life, that is above life, that's with conscious individuals, collect together within him. He remembers them together, feels them together. They begin to form within him a certain whole. He does not give a clear account to himself as to what, how, and why. Or if he does give an account to himself, then he explains it wrongly. But the point is not in this, but in the fact that the results of these influences collect together, crystallize, collect together within him. And after a certain time, they form within him a certain kind of a magnetic center, which begins to attract to itself kindred influences. And in this manner, it grows. Important concept here. The magnetic center grows. As we accumulate these influences, as we draw them towards us, as they crystallize within us, as they take form and substance within us, they grow. If the magnetic center receives sufficient nourishment, and if there is no strong resistance on the part of other sides of a man's personality, which are the result of influences created in life, the magnetic center begins to influence a man's orientation, obliging him to turn around and even move in a certain direction. And those of you on the mystical path, I know I've experienced this in myself numerous times. Something just pulls me away from being normal and into a different direction. When the magnetic center attains sufficient force and development, the word development, link it back with crystallization, link that back with the idea that we're actually really growing something within us that has some kind of magnetic capability of pulling us or bringing influences towards us and bringing us towards certain influences like a magnet. When the magnetic center attains sufficient force and development, a man already understands the idea of the way and begins to look for the way. The search for the way may take many years and may lead to nothing. This depends on the conditions, upon circumstances, upon the power of the magnetic center, upon the power and the direction of inner tendencies which are not concerned with this search and which may divert a man at the moment when the possibility of finding the way appears. So I'm just we're almost running out of time. The thing that I wanted to really emphasize and come back to is that the magnetic center, somehow we start to pick up influences. These influences kind of coagulate. They grow together within us. And these influences are conscious influences. They come from a higher level of humanity. And when we begin to develop enough of them, and I'm emphasizing in my heart, they kind of crystallize together. And this becomes almost like a compass. But the magnetic center is not an abstract concept. It's not something, when we talk about energy, energy is an abstract concept. Fuel is not abstract. Gasoline is not abstract. Kerosene, coal are not abstract. They're real things, but when we try to explain what is common between them, we use the term energy. But energy itself comes from the human brain. It's a way of abstract thinking. And the magnetic center leads itself to a degree of that abstract thinking, but it isn't. It's actually something that exists within us, something that has crystallized within us. I mean, we can speak of the magnetic center abstractly, but there is something real within us that has crystallized over many years as a result of absorbing many influences, the C influences, recognizing their importance, nurturing them, growing them. So the magnetic center is not this abstract definition to try to explain things that go on within us. The magnetic center actually has a real form, a real existence within ourselves. And when you're on the mystical path, at a certain point, it's very important to learn to surrender as much as you can to your own magnetic center, to recognize its influence within you, to recognize its power within you, and to just say, okay, lead me, guide me. If you have a fully operational magnetic center, you can walk into a bookstore and you can say, guide me. And you will find some amazing books that may have a conscious influence. It is this crystallization. I've also described it as the lodestone in the heart. And I've shown a picture of Galileo's lodestone. I probably just, let me see if I can quickly pull this picture up. Should be, okay, I'm not able to. Oh, that's because I'm going in the wrong one. Pictures, load. This is a picture of Galileo's lodestone. Just give me a second. So Galileo Galilei, his lodestone. And I put an arrow in the center. This is a magnetic rock, so a weight has to be hung, and then the compass above, and it's like a compass. And it's like we have this lodestone within our heart called the magnetic center. And every time we become aware of that influence within us, within our heart, we, in a sense, make it a little stronger. We grow it a little more. But the magnetic center is something that's very real, that exists within us, those on the mystical path. Those who aren't on the mystical path think I'm speaking gibberish when I start talking about this, because they have no internal experience of it. Mystical teachings, mystical truths are not important to them. When we develop this and it has that sufficient intensity, it, in a sense, takes over our life. And, you know, we are obliged to pursue the mystical path. We are obliged to do this inner work. It's like we're pulled towards that. So I've got a couple more minutes, just, you know, 2 more minutes. Any questions, any comments? Briefly, again, you know, this was just 2 cleanup points that I really wanted to emphasize. Okay, let's just be aware of our body. Come back to our own embodiment. To sense your body from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head. Some people, you know, years ago accused me of being focusing on the physical body and the sensation of self. And they said, there's so much more to these teachings. And I said, I know, but this is the preliminary. This is the basic teaching. The basic exercise, the most important exercise to master at the beginning is to develop the sensation of self. It's the easiest one, and then we begin to develop other awarenesses beyond this. But just bring yourself back to your body. Bring yourself back to the touch of clothing on your skin, the air that touches your face, the hair on your head, the touch of jewelry, the awareness of gravity, the awareness of balance, the atmospheric pressure, the temperature of the room, the temperature inside yourself. Try to bring yourself back to your physical body, to be as real here and now in this moment as possible by flooding your physical body with the power of your attention, by bringing that power of attention to bear on the physical body from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head. And pursue mystical influences, pursue sea influences, grow the lodestone in your heart, grow the magnetic center. And okay, I would like to, next week, hopefully Brian will be back and we'll talk about music finally. So I'd like to thank you for being here and to take care, and hopefully see you again next week. Bye now.
Oh, yes. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao.